Imagine having your period thousands of years ago. No pads, no tampons, no medicine. So, what did ancient women actually use? The answer begins in nature and ends with one of the most important everyday inventions ever created. For ancient women, having a period was not just uncomfortable. It could make everyday life much more difficult. There were no bathrooms to visit, no spare clothes waiting in a closet. Every day still meant gathering food, carrying water, taking care of children, walking long distances, and sometimes escaping dangerous animals. Life simply did not stop for a few days every month. Staying inside a cave was usually not an option because every pair of hands mattered. So women had to find practical solutions using only what was around them. Whatever they used needed to be soft enough to avoid painful rubbing, absorb liquid as well as possible, and be easy to replace. It also had to come from nature because that was the only place they could find materials. Without realizing it, ancient women became some of the first people to solve an everyday engineering problem using observation, creativity, and trial and error. And that search for a better solution had only just begun. So where could ancient women find a solution? They looked in the only place they could: nature. Early humans had already learned that different plants had different uses. Some could be eaten, some could help heal wounds. Others could be used to build shelters or make clothing. It was only natural to wonder if nature could also help solve this problem. Women likely began experimenting with anything that felt soft, stayed together, and could absorb moisture. Different regions used different materials depending on what was available. In forests, soft moss was an obvious choice. In open grasslands, dried grass and plant fibers were easier to find. Some people used soft leaves, others used wool or animal fur. There wasn't one universal solution because people lived in completely different environments. But one thing stayed the same everywhere. Women observed, experimented, and improved their ideas over generations. Long before science explained why certain materials worked better than others, experience was already teaching them which ones were worth keeping. Out of all the natural materials ancient women could find, moss may have been one of the smartest choices. It was soft, lightweight, and could absorb a surprising amount of liquid for its size. Even more interesting, some species of moss naturally contain substances that slow the growth of certain bacteria. Ancient people had no idea why this happened. They simply noticed that some materials worked better than others. Of course, not every community used moss. It depended entirely on where they lived. In places without forests, women adapted by using whatever nature provided, but the idea remained the same. Find something comfortable, absorbent, and easy to replace. This wasn't luck. It was centuries of observation. One generation discovered something useful, the next copied it, and little by little the knowledge spread. Long before laboratories and scientific studies existed, experience was already teaching people which materials made everyday life a little easier. Nature had quietly become humanity's first source of practical solutions. As human civilizations grew, life became more organized. Ancient Egypt was one of the first places where people made fine linen from flax. Unlike rough animal skins or handfuls of moss, linen was soft, flexible, and could be washed and reused many times. Historians believe many Egyptian women likely folded pieces of linen into simple, reusable pads. While the exact details have been lost over thousands of years, linen was already widely used for clothing, bandages, and household items, making it one of the most practical materials available. Wealthier families could afford softer, higher quality fabric, while poorer women probably relied on older or worn-out pieces of cloth. Instead of searching for new plants every month, many women could simply wash the fabric, dry it in the hot Egyptian sun, and use it again. It was a small change, but an important one. For the first time, dealing with periods slowly became less about finding something in nature and more about making something that could be used again and again. As Greek civilization grew, people became increasingly interested in understanding how the human body worked. Physicians observed illnesses, recorded symptoms, and searched for natural explanations instead of relying only on myths. Menstruation was one of the many mysteries they tried to understand. Although many of their ideas turned out to be wrong, something important had changed. They were asking scientific questions. Greek women most likely continued using soft wool or folded linen cloths that could be washed and reused. These materials were practical, widely available, and easier to shape than loose plants or moss. At the same time, doctors began writing about women's health, pregnancy, and the monthly cycle, trying to explain what they observed. They did not yet know about hormones or the reproductive system, but they were carefully watching patterns. Every observation, even the incorrect ones, brought people one small step closer to understanding the human body. For the first time, periods were becoming not only an everyday challenge, but also a subject people tried to study and explain. The Romans inherited many ideas from the Greeks, but they were famous for turning ideas into practical everyday solutions. Their cities had better roads, public baths, advanced plumbing, and a huge textile industry. Cloth became easier to produce and easier to replace than in many earlier societies. Women most likely continued using folded linen or soft wool because these materials could be washed, dried, and reused many times. Unlike natural materials that had to be gathered every month, cloth could be prepared in advance and carried when traveling. Public baths also made washing reusable cloth much easier, helping people stay cleaner than in many parts of the ancient world. Of course, life was still very different from today. There were no disposable products, no waterproof materials, and no perfect solution. But little by little, women were finding ways to make everyday life more comfortable. Without realizing it, they were slowly moving closer to something that looked much more like the reusable pads used for centuries afterward. After the fall of the Roman Empire, everyday life became much harder in many parts of Europe. Most people lived in small villages, and almost everything a family needed had to be made at home. There were no factories producing cloth, and buying new fabric was expensive. Because of this, women carefully reused old linen, worn-out clothing, and scraps of fabric that could be folded into simple, reusable pads. Every piece of cloth was valuable and often repaired instead of thrown away. Washing these reusable materials was another challenge. Without running water or modern soap, it took much more time and effort to keep them clean. Even so, women continued adapting. Mothers taught daughters, older sisters helped younger sisters, and practical knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. No books explained the best solution. There were no instructions. People simply learned from experience. Different villages developed different habits, but the goal never changed: finding a way to continue daily life with as much comfort and dignity as possible, despite having very limited resources. For thousands of years, the basic idea had barely changed. Women folded cloth, washed it, dried it, and used it again. But during the Industrial Revolution, something completely different happened. Factories began producing huge amounts of cotton and fabric faster and cheaper than ever before. Materials that had once been expensive slowly became available to ordinary families. At the same time, scientists and manufacturers started creating fabrics designed to absorb much more liquid than traditional cloth. For the first time, people were no longer asking, "What can we find?" They were asking, "What can we invent?" This changed everything. Instead of adapting nature's materials, humans began engineering better ones. The goal was no longer just to survive each month. It was to make everyday life cleaner, safer, and more comfortable. Without realizing it, the world was getting closer to one of the biggest improvements in menstrual care. And surprisingly, that breakthrough would arrive because of a war, not because someone was trying to invent a better pad. Then came World War I. At first, it had nothing to do with periods. Nurses working near the front lines needed bandages that could absorb large amounts of blood while remaining lightweight and easy to carry. A company developed a new material called cotton. It was originally designed for medical dressings, and it absorbed much more liquid than ordinary cotton. But something unexpected happened. Many nurses noticed that this material worked incredibly well for managing their own periods. It was softer, more absorbent, and far more comfortable than folded cloth. Soon, the idea spread beyond the hospitals. What had been invented for wounded soldiers suddenly became the foundation for a completely different invention. For the first time, people realized that a product could be made specifically for menstrual care instead of simply adapting whatever materials happened to be available. After thousands of years of trial and error, humanity had finally discovered a completely new approach. The new material worked so well that people quickly realized it could change everyday life, not just medicine. Before long, companies began creating products designed specifically for periods instead of adapting old cloth or natural materials. For the first time, women could buy something made for this exact purpose. But there was one unexpected problem. The invention was modern. Society was not. In the early 1900s, many people felt uncomfortable talking about periods in public. Some women were too embarrassed to even ask for menstrual products at a store. Shopkeepers noticed this and came up with a simple solution. Instead of asking for the product, customers could quietly pick up a package, leave their payment in a collection box, and walk away without saying a word. Today that sounds unusual, but at the time it helped thousands of women feel more comfortable. As the years passed, disposable pads became more common. Conversations slowly became more open, and something that had once been surrounded by silence gradually became just another everyday product. One small invention had quietly changed millions of lives. Today, a modern pad looks incredibly simple. It is thin, lightweight, comfortable, and designed to absorb many times its own weight. Inside are carefully engineered layers that quickly pull moisture away from the skin and lock it inside, helping people stay dry throughout the day. It is easy to forget how remarkable that really is. Thousands of years ago, Women searched forests for soft moss, gathered grass, folded old pieces of cloth, and spent hours washing and reusing them. Every generation made small improvements, even if they never realized they were contributing to a much bigger story. What began as simple observation slowly became science, engineering, and modern manufacturing. The goal, however, never changed. Women weren't searching for a perfect invention. They were searching for a way to continue living their everyday lives with greater comfort, confidence, and freedom. And after thousands of years of experimentation, humanity finally built a solution that fits in the palm of your hand.